Good afternoon. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we meet and we learn from each other today on country. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land, where I live, work and write, and I pay my sincere respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may be here with us today. Welcome and thank you for joining us another episode of Your Library at Home. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachel Franks and I'm the coordinator of scholarship at the library, and today I'm introducing an event that's a little bit different to what I would normally do. This is a terrifically timely event today, talking about the art of care for ourselves and for others. We're really lucky today to have at the library Alex Stewart in conversation with author Brooke McAlary and talking about care. So if you have any questions, please use the chat feature in Zoom. Otherwise, I'm sure that Alex will be asking all sorts of fabulous questions and drawing out some great tips for all of us right now. Thanks so much, Alex.
And thank you, Rachel, and to everybody at the library. Hello, Brooke. How are you?
I'm good, Alex. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm just so thrilled that the Big Potts Point garbage truck has actually just gone past.
Excellent.
In perfect time for our session today. Now, I'm really happy that this book has come to the world when it has. As a fellow author, I know books are very hard to birth. However prescient they are, however important they are to the times, it doesn't make the road easier. And when you look at your book, Care, it can look like it came literally at the perfect time. And because you wrote it sort of probably over the last 18 months, ironically, the exact timeline of the pandemic that we're all living through, did it start to shape itself as a sort of response to COVID in a way?
It did, after a fashion. So I started writing a different book that was still relevant to the idea of care, but more so an investigation into what self-care had become as like a commercialized sort of inaccessible aspirational idea. Mm-hmm. And then I had to throw all of that out once, end of 2019 came, and the bushfires and everything that came on the back of that, and then hot on the heels of COVID. So when I threw it all out in about February, March 2020, I was forced to come back to the idea of care from a completely different perspective, which was one of, compassion and gentleness, and how do we care? How do we show up in care when there are so many challenging things impacting us? And, as people who feel big, who care deeply, so many of us found ourselves in a situation where we felt cared out or numb or disconnected. And I think that really scared a lot of us. I know it scared me when I found myself in that situation. So it really became a process of writing the book that I needed, which was not necessarily what I started out to do, but I'm really glad that that's where I landed with it, because, there's no way we could have known that this situation with COVID was going to last as long as it has. It turns out that what felt like a timely creation for me has actually become a timely sort of thing to put out into the world now, which is a funny place to land, but I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, nice. And I'm sorry, but the garbage truck is still going, so it doesn't take long. It's a daily exercise, guys, so it'll be gone in a minute. So I'm interested, you mentioned there obviously about connection. And it's funny because I actually have a page open in the book that speaks to connection and all of the health benefits of connection. And to me, there's a really sad irony in this, because of the very nature of living through a pandemic making us more disconnected. We really have to make an effort to be connected right now to self, because there's so many moving parts in the background, so many stressors that might not normally be at the magnitudes and levels that they are, but also physically disconnected from a lot of people. And I know that with overseas family or even regional family right now for us here in New South Wales, like we can't just go and hug our mum. It's just not possible.
Exactly.
And so you've listed strengthens the immune system, reduces levels of inflammation, faster recovery from illness and disease, reduction of the effects of stress, improved heart health. So, and the list goes on, and people can read it in the book when they grab their copy if you haven't already. I therefore would love to ask you, because of the timely release of the book, how have you felt you've created connection where it doesn't necessarily exist for people right now in ways that they've just been able to fall back on normally?
Yeah, it's been challenging. You know, even pre-COVID, so many Australians were battling loneliness. It was 2018, I think, Swinburne University did a study which showed that in any given week, more than 50% of Australians felt lonely at least one day per week. That's half of us. And then maybe 1 in 4 of us, or close to 1 in 4 of us, were experiencing loneliness more than half the time, you know, every week. And that was pre-COVID. So I can only imagine that the numbers certainly wouldn't have decreased and probably have increased since then. So, you know, I think tying back to your point about the impacts, like the health impacts of connection, it's really important to recognize what the flip side of that is doing. You know, loneliness has been shown to impact our health as much as smoking like 15 cigarettes a day, which blew my mind. And also made me realize that, you know, we carry this sense of guilt around for feeling lonely, or I know I certainly have, because we live in this hyper-connected world. And it's like, well, how can I feel lonely?
How am I lonely with 700 friends on Facebook?
Exactly. And, you know, not only is that not something we need to be ashamed of, because what we're searching for and what we're craving are two different things. We're searching for oxytocin, which is real connection and social trust, and, you know, that sense of security when we are with people or communicating with people who, you know, who we trust and we have that bond with. But because of this hyper-connected world we live in, we're actually chasing dopamine, which is, you know, a completely different neurotransmitter. And for me, it's been shifting towards acts of connection, be it virtual or in person, that allow us to experience that sense of bonding and connection that we get when we, you know, release oxytocin into our brains. And that's things like eye contact, prolonging eye contact with a loved one just for a few seconds extra. It can be eye contact with a pet, particularly dogs. That boosts our sense of security and connection. Yoga, and I'm thinking about things that are as accessible to as many of us as possible. So things for people who live alone, you know, yoga and self-massage, they stimulate the body in the same ways that a hug or empathetic touch also stimulates our bodies and, you know, as a result, our brains. So it's really kind of shifting my mindset into how to make the connections that we have more meaningful, you know, and that can look like writing a letter to people or choosing to FaceTime my parents just to catch up, not because I should or not because, you know, but because I want to hear how they are and have that 5-10 minute conversation about what's been happening in their day, or, you know, hear them laugh, or when my kids get up in the morning, rather than kind of hide myself away in my office to try and get that extra 5 minutes of alone time, have a cuddle with my kids. Like, it's really important, I think, in times like this, to look at what opportunities we already have for connection and to really become aware of them and become aware of the benefits that they hold.
Yeah, and it's also really about scheduling it into your day. If you're noticing the days going by and you haven't had those feelings or made those contacts, I mean, just chucking on a 15-minute YouTube yoga class to know that you can do that and really stimulate those parts of the brain to calm yourself and feel connected to the self.
Yeah,
it's huge.
It's massive, and it is, you know, accessible. Where we're fortunate, I suppose, in the way that there are those opportunities for a lot of us to engage in, connection type activities in like as little as, 10 seconds. There's things that we can do that will heighten that sense of connection to self or to someone else. And I think the tendency is to think that all virtual connection is second rate, but at the moment, in most cases, that's all we've got. So, really utilizing it as a tool for connection rather than as a tool for, validation is an important shift to make, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so your previous book, Slow, which was equally beautiful and useful, what was the sort of trajectory for, feeling like care needed to be born, and how did the two relate?
Yeah, I think it came down to two things. Firstly was the idea that I mentioned earlier that, like a lot of really worthy countercultural movements, slow living, so what Slow was about, and self-care had both become, I guess, co-opted by capitalism. And that really bothered me because they are both so incredibly powerful, and their roots are in they're as far away from capitalism as you could possibly imagine, and in preparing to write this book, I started to look at what the roots of self-care are, and they've got nothing to do with face masks or juice cleansers or anything like that. That it has to do with the literal skill set of learning how to care for oneself. And it started in with institutionalized patients in the 1950s and 60s. And then self-care became one of the key tenets of the Black Panther Party in the 70s because, they were serving in a really underserved, underrepresented community that recognized that no one's here to care for us. So we need to, as a community, collectively care for ourselves. So to see self-care become this very commercialized version of that kind of was the reason I think that I wanted to start exploring what care could look like if we removed a lot of the money and the aspiration, the accessibility issues from it. And then Slow taught me, I guess, about the importance of reframing our relationship to time and how important it is to recognize what we value personally, what are our personal values, what are our personal priorities, and then creating pockets of time to live like those things are our values and they are our priorities. And to me, that's sort of a real extension in care, is, how to create time when we don't feel like we have any for these things that really do matter.
Yeah. And you talk about some of the barriers that commercialization of the basics of health and feeling well as a human being and feeling important and on purpose and connected in the start of care. And I think that's really valuable to people because, how many times have we thought, oh, that course looks amazing of this, or, that meditation program, but yeah, it's $99, so I guess I can't meditate.
Right.
And, we create these products out of the basics. And I think I'm always a big fan of putting an alarm bell, a little red flag up when the basics are productized.
Yeah. And it's just for me, it was a matter of asking, well, like who are we paying for this stuff? And how can we make it something that is accessible to as many of us as possible? And I think that that's a very multi-layer answer, but I hope I try to, I try to address that in the kindness chapter where I talk about, self-compassion and learning how to be kind to ourselves as a part of this practice of care, because if we don't like ourselves, we become very easy to manipulate. Marketers know this, they market to our pain points. So learning how to have kindness for ourselves, have kindness for our families, our friends, our communities, really does change the fabric of, of this idea of care and how it doesn't need to be a commercialized thing. I have no issue with self-care, by the way. I have no issue with any of those things. I think meditation is powerful. I think, giving yourself a face mask is wonderful. But I just I really, as you say, that red flag comes up strong when I think this is leaving a lot of people out of the conversation and out of the benefits.
Absolutely. And it's so funny, a total sign of the times we live in. You've said face mask twice now. It's only on the second time that you said face mask that I finally resolved my confusion about you mentioning a face mask the first time. Like, what's that got to do with self-care? I had completely forgotten about the beauty mask that you could put on your face to feel good.
And I'm not going after face masks either. They're fine. They're completely fine. But, you know, maybe not so, they don't feel as relevant at this point.
Not right now, no. I'm going to read your collection of words about what care is in the start of your book, because I think it's really beautiful and all-encompassing. So care is love, compassion, empathy, tenderness, accuracy, attention, responsibility, caution, stewardship, maintenance, repair, watchfulness, and assistance. Now, I bet the people joining us today, a couple would have come up there where you're like, how's that care?
Yeah.
And I'm just going to share one of mine because I would love for you to elaborate on this one. Care is accuracy.
Yeah, I mean, initially it was literally just looking at all the different ways that we can use the word care in a sentence. And I didn't want to leave any of them off the table, because I think one of the things that writing about slow living and these kind of these nebulous ideas has taught me is that all of these ideas look different to people at different points in their life. So, you know, accuracy can sound like a very rigid idea, but for me, it was more about clarity, clarity of purpose. You know, what am I doing with this piece of time or this moment of energy? How is that showing up in care? You know, what are the ripples of that I can feel, if any? And I think it's a call to be mindful, really, and pay attention to where that time and energy is going.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about reconnecting with nature, because this is one of the things that, whether you're in lockdown or not, we all are able to do right now at some point in our day within our 5-kilometre radius in New South Wales and Vic. But it is possible, and it is just so important. And you have come to realise in your past that you had disconnected from nature, and I'd love for you to share your journey back and what that now kind of looks like on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I mean, I realized, I think, that there was a huge disconnect from nature for me when my kid, when we had our first baby, I guess. I had this stack of veggie gardening books next to my bed that I would read every night. I would plot out garden plans. I was really enthusiastic about the idea of getting my hands in the soil, growing some food, you know, creating something new out of seeds and dirt, and I guess raising our kids with that foundation. But instead of going out and creating that veggie garden, I got addicted to an online farming game called Heyday instead. And I think, to me, the absolute absurdity of that situation was the wake-up call that I needed. You know, I wanted to get out in the dirt. I wanted to dig and to feel the sun on my back and to, you know, rotate crops and all that sort of stuff. But it was just a step too far. It felt too hard. It felt too, my efforts wouldn't pay off. So instead, I closed myself off and stared at my screen and planted pretend apples and soybean crops. It was ridiculous. And one day I realized how ridiculous it was, obviously, but it took me like an embarrassing amount of time. And I deleted the game. and got outside. And I'm like, okay, let's not worry about creating your own urban farm. Let's just, pay attention to what's happening outside right now. So every time I went to hang the clothes on the line, I just stopped for 30 seconds or a minute, had a look at what flowers were blooming, or, if I could see any skinks or what the ants were doing. And that very gradually turned into a practice of noticing and tapping into the seasons and, the natural world that I began to recognize I was a part of. And I think that was the real disconnect for me, was that it was something I could choose to either join or not join, or, to engage with or not engage with. That's not possible. We are nature. We are an ecosystem in and of ourselves, but we breathe oxygen that trees produce and, and that the oceans produce, and the food that we eat is grown in the ground. And, it was sort of this very gradual and very obvious, looking back at it now, but very gradual realization that as much as I wanted to, I couldn't disconnect from nature. It was just that I was refusing to engage, and even the way that I used to speak about nature was really telling. Like, we're off to spend time in nature, and that meant go to a national park or go to the beach. I didn't look at it like looking at an indoor plant, or just paying attention to the potato that I was peeling, or getting up in the morning, having a cup of tea and drawing a deep breath into my lungs. Like,
yeah, exactly. I was going to say, it's like literally the fluctuation of your hormones in your cycle is
exactly
nature. Yeah.
And tapping into all of that has been so liberating, and I think that everyone has their own journey towards that, and it depends on where you live and what your circumstances are, and how much time and access you have. But there is always something that we can do to engage with nature, even in lockdown situations. On explore.org, there's a website. If you Google explore.org webcams, they have this whole range of nature webcams that you can sit and watch. And like, there's bears fishing and penguins and all this kind of stuff. And so even if you are unable to leave your home, excuse me, there's always a way that you can engage with nature and kind of observe it. And from there, I think we start to get a sense of responsibility and protection, and for me, that's probably the biggest benefit.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think what you've said there is something really important, because so many of us feel disconnected. And, if you think about healthcare, for example, like, some of us don't even realize there might be something a little bit off for ages, or we put it away. And like, we're literally ignoring our very own nature by suppressing those thoughts or little inklings that we have. And I actually just got an email in my inbox this morning. My son's a mad tennis player, and it was from the Mental Toughness guys, who help kids, deal with all the big feelings of competitive sports and become more mentally tough. And I thought of you. I thought, oh, this is so topical to the conversation with Brooke today, because it was all about that your number one asset on a tennis court is you starting to tap into and notice all the tiny little things happening in your environment, and being able to just be aware of that one thing and blocking all the things out. And so it confirms exactly what you were then saying, starting to notice what the little ants are doing. And we think, oh God, I have all this, I'm not being productive. I'm just not getting much done right now. And our best possible asset in a lockdown situation is raising awareness.
Absolutely.
And really starting to become mindful. And it was like what you just said, what Anthony emailed us this morning, what your book is saying. It's one of the most helpful tools to get us through these crazy times.
Yeah. And I think that your point of, productivity and this is a waste of time and I've got so much else I should be doing is a really important one to recognize, because I think it speaks to our belief that we are somehow like machines, that we can continue to output and input, and we live in these two modes of either consuming absorbing information, binging TV, listening to podcasts, reading books, scrolling the news, or output, work, cooking, parenting, all that stuff. That, these are the two modes that we operate in. And these are like the machine modes. They're things that we can kind of switch in and out of. But what it fails to address is the in-between, which is the being, just being, that space in between consuming and producing, where we get to think our thoughts and develop, as you say, that awareness of, whatever it may be, whether it's bodily awareness or awareness of the natural, tiny natural phenomenon that are happening right in front of us, or the thoughts that we continue to return to, or, our responses to, if we watch news conferences every day, and how we feel about that and how we feel afterwards, like that, those sorts of self assessments and self knowledge, that can only come in the space in between. And I think that while ever we think of ourselves as machines and have those expectations of ourselves, to either be consuming or producing, we really leave so much of that self-knowledge and that inner world on the table. And I think that is one of the biggest disservices that we can, do for ourselves, because not only do we get to know our inner worlds and, those quiet, intuitive voices that we all have, but it's in the in-between, it's in the daydreaming and the laying on the bed for 5 minutes and doing nothing. It's, sitting there having a cup of coffee with no inputs at all. That's where we access our imagination. That's when we start to access, problem solving and creative skills and critical thought, all things that we need, particularly at the moment, to get through what is a really challenging time. We need all of those things. So, I think rest is a really, really important part of the picture when we're talking about care too.
I'm so glad that you have validated the fact that my son and I accidentally woke up at 20 to 9 this morning. We're like, whoops, okay.
I'm always going to validate sleeping.
I know, but we just feel so good today. It's great.
Yep. And we need it. We need rest. Whatever that might look like for you, we need it. And I don't think any amount of rest is too small to be impactful either. Even if it's only 30 seconds extra of sitting, like this morning, I like to get up, make a cup of tea and sit in our living room. I open my blind, I open the curtains. That's my ritual. I open my curtains, I greet the day, and I just sit and do nothing. I have no agenda. And my son came into me probably within the first 30 seconds or so. And instead of kind of getting rigid and going, this is meant to be my time, this is when I rest, when I recalibrate, he just climbed onto my lap and we sat quietly together for 30 seconds. And, I think the important thing is to acknowledge that is also rest, if you want it to be. So there are ways.
Mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you can view that, I could have viewed that through like a rigid sort of lens of, scarcity, like I'm missing out. Or you can flip that and think this is an opportunity to sit in quiet, to rest, to connect, to just be for those, 30 seconds and then get on with the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that mindset shift is really important too.
100% for parents, especially. I remember interviewing a psychologist on my show a couple of months ago, and we were talking about the parenthood aspect of time and care. And she said, now just remember, you actually signed up for this. So you're going to have to attend to your children whenever they need you. So how about bringing a different mindset to that situation? I get to rather than I have to. Mm-hmm. And I think in the intense power of the culture of me, that we see on social media, it's me time, me this, fill up my cup, of course, all very important and valid things. Yep. We can forget to apply that the me is actually also the us, and that's also beautiful as well.
Yeah. I think, the last couple of years have really caused me to spend a lot of time thinking about that me-centric kind of culture that we live in, and the, you know, highly individualistic culture that we live in, while I think that it's really important to develop boundaries and to you know, create space for yourself, for your own healing, for your own rest, for your own sense of care, I think that for me anyway, it's certainly been so much more powerful to view that as a way to then care more collectively, you know, a way to show up for my kids, a way to be a better partner, a way to you know, be a more active community member, a way to you know, show up for my family, my extended family, my friends in different ways. And for me, it just feels like a much more collective, much more collaborative way of viewing the idea of care, even if sometimes that looks like taking time, you know, away. And I think that that sort of taps into the idea of like, this is what I get to do as a result of that too.
I'm so glad you used the word time then, because that segues beautifully into the next question I had for you, which was about time and us feeling a real sense of lack around it. How do we find the time? I love on page 145 and onwards, for another couple of pages, for anyone who already has the book, but make a note of it for when you get it. You literally speak to the, oh, I don't have no time. And you say, well, here's what you could do with less than a minute. Here's what you can do with half an hour. And you give lots of different examples for different pockets of time. How has that played out for your own learning about time and creating a sense of time to care for oneself and your people around you?
Yeah, I think that it's really important to push back a little bit on that idea of I don't have time, and reflect on what we are doing with our time. And I understand that current situation is really different for a lot of people, particularly, yeah, exactly. Particularly if you're homeschooling and all that sort of stuff. But tech is a huge time suck for all of us, and I'm just as guilty as anyone else. So if we're saying I don't have time for 30 seconds of diaphragmatic breathing, then I'd probably recommend putting some kind of time limit on Instagram, or, you know, sticking your phone in a drawer for 5 minutes and going and doing some stretching, or going and reading a few pages of a book, you know, really just reflecting on how much of our energy and our time we're giving to our tech is one of the things that we can do. The other thing I think that's really important is sort of another mindset shift, like we were talking about before, is to recognize the instances that we are already showing up for ourselves, or we are already, you know, showing up in those tiny acts of care for other people, and highlighting them in our minds that we're already doing it. You know, I think that that's really important in terms of developing an abundance mentality of how we are spending our time, because you already care. We already show up in care in so many different ways throughout the day. We probably just don't realize it. So I think firstly, recognizing that we do have time and we can do things to expand that time somewhat, and we're already doing them in a lot of different ways. We're just not paying attention to what we're doing. That for me has certainly shifted my perception of time. But the other thing that I'm enamored with, this idea of awe, experiencing awe in our lives. One of the byproducts of experiencing awe frequently is that we have a much larger perception of time and how much of it we have to spend. So people who experience awe frequently, they're more patient, they're more generous, and they literally feel like they have more minutes in the day, even if they have the exact same number of minutes in the day they had previously. And it's to do with how we perceive ourselves as part of something much larger. You know, it's sort of, it's a sense of self-diminishment almost, but in a positive way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So for me, I always, if I feel rushed, if I feel like things are hectic or frantic, I look for opportunities to experience awe in my day. And that can be like a 5-second fleeting thought that just reframes the way you see yourself in the world, you know, for that day. And I have a prop.
Yay.
It can be as simple as,
Yeah.
grab a piece of fruit. Just before you peel it, before you bite into it, like look at it and recognize that this started as a flower, on a tree that somebody planted. And over a season, it received the right amount of rain and food and sun. And then one day somebody picked it, and this is where they picked it. And they packed it, and it ended up heading off to the market, and somehow it got to you, this particular flower that became a piece of fruit that you then get to eat. I think that's miraculous. And I think it takes no extra time. You just think about it when you pick up your apple or your mandarin. And for me, that's one of the easiest ways of tapping into that sense of awe. And as a result, experiencing that stretching of time.
And there's a lot to be said for saying grace, literally, isn't there? Yeah.
Totally.
You don't have to be religious, just to recognize the spiritual aspect of doing that.
Exactly. And, just reflecting and in gratitude and in like the vastness of things that are so mundane. I write in the book about thinking about how many molecules there are in a drop of water sitting in the palm of your hand. That blows my mind. There's, like a sextillion and a half molecules of in a drop of water on your hand. And, that's something in the realm of the number of stars in our galaxy. Like it, the thing about awe, I think, is it's not only wondrous, but can also make us feel a little bit afraid. And I think that's where the self-diminishment and the perception of ourselves as part of something much greater comes in and is probably the most transformative.
Yeah, right. Has that been transformative for you? What did you notice?
Yeah, I think it right sizes my problems, to be honest. Feeling yourself diminish or feeling yourself connect. And that's the other side of awe, is that people who experience it frequently have a much stronger sense of connection to others in humanity, in the sense that we are all a part of one natural world. We're all part of, the same planet. We share the same air. And I think that for me has been really important in I guess recognizing how tightly woven the fabric of humanity is, and particularly in the last 18 months, sort of watching the tragedy and the catastrophe of COVID unfold in different parts of the world has felt, and in a way it's harder because you open yourself up to empathy and compassion, and that's painful, but it's also really, really powerful.
Like with bushfires as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
So given we've been talking about time and awe, and given we have 60 odd wonderful humans with us right now, I think we should take half a minute and do one of these little care things. What do you think?
I think that sounds awesome.
Which one shall we choose?
Okay.
Oh, shall we try and sit next to a window? Well, because most of us would probably be able to clock a window.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, tell us what to do as we look out the window.
Okay, so first of all, if you don't have a window near you, you can either, find a photo on your phone or a website, something like that, or a piece of fruit, indoor plant, something, something that is alive.
Mm-hmm.
If you have access to none of those things, just place your hand on your chest and feel your heartbeat, because you are alive. Now, as you look out the window, I just encourage you to notice something that you have not noticed before, whether it is the way that the leaves are moving in the breeze, whether it is the sound, it's pouring rain outside my house at the moment. And the sound is heavy and thick. If you can look at, perhaps you can see a flower, a dandelion weed growing, anything that you hadn't noticed, just spend 5 seconds reflecting on it, looking at the tiniest detail of it, and allowing yourself to expand into that, that moment. And what that does is not only open you up to experiencing the awe of that tiny detail, that natural world, that connection to the natural world. But you've also essentially stretched your experience of time for those few seconds. And that's something that is available to you at any moment of any day. You know, I mentioned placing your hand on your heart. That's one of the other really powerful ones that I often come back to if I feel like everything else is too hard. Place your hand on your heart and just for a few seconds, stop and feel it beat, and recognize that happens thousands of times a day without us having to think about it. And we don't think about it unless something goes wrong, typically.
Yeah.
And here's where the fear side of awe comes into it. One day it will stop beating. And that is a really, really powerful thing to spend a moment reflecting, because for me, again, it right sizes things. You know, when we pull ourselves out of the tiny day-to-day concerns, just for a moment, it allows us to get that spaciousness, I suppose, to reflect on, you know, our place in the world, what we're doing with it, what we do with our time and our energy, and how we show up every day. And if that all feels too lofty, it's just a really beautiful thing to do.
I love that you guided us through that one. That's gorgeous. And I've been watching my little, well, not so little, but a huge Magnolia grandiflora tree, and the little magnolia bobbing up and down on top in the rain. It was just like, oh, I didn't look at that at all today.
Right. And like we see it, but we don't see it.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, it's just allowing ourselves to switch into that noticing mode for a few seconds. And I can almost guarantee that if you think back over your day tonight, if you're laying in bed, that moment will feel significant. Like you'll remember it because you have told your brain that this new detail, this moment is worth capturing, you know, and that in and of itself expands our perception of time as well.
And doesn't that just remind us how easy it is to shift away from some of those negative forces that we come into contact with, especially in tech, where we might have feelings of comparisonitis pop up, or someone be quite hostile in their language about things. You know, we don't want that to be the thing we recap at the end of the day. We want the beautiful bobbing up and down Magnolia grandiflora. It's a much more gorgeous thought. Yeah.
And it, you know, it doesn't feel like it always, but we can choose to focus our attention into those positive experiences, even just for a few moments. And it does make an impact. It really does, because you're signaling to yourself that this moment of beauty or wonder or nature or connection or kindness is worth remembering. And, you know, the ripples of those moments of noticing may not make themselves clear to you ever, but they certainly, or they probably won't make themselves clear to you immediately. But if, let's say, you know, kindness leads us as someone who has received a kindness or is offered a kindness, it means that we are more inclined to offer kindnesses in the future, to be more generous, to have more patience, to want to cooperate and connect with people more. Like, they're all proven benefits of kindness. The ripples of those can be really powerful. Like, if you look at your relationship with a child, for example, if you show up to that relationship, to, you know, them asking you a question about homeschooling with just a smidgen more patience, or a little bit more time, or a sense of wanting to collaborate or connect, then that will change the way you communicate with them. And that over time will change the foundation of your relationships, which over time, you know, leads them to grow into people who feel secure in their relationships. And how does that impact them and the work they do and how they show up in the world? You know, it's, to me, that's why I think the idea of care is quite literally world changing. Yeah. It's not flashy, but it's powerful.
And you say that kindness is one of the ways to unlock humanity's superpowers in the book. And I think that's so true. And you've just given us like a tiny window into what your one relationship with your child can do to then, you know, literally create a more positive trajectory heading out into the world one day.
Exactly. And I think when it comes to acts of care, there is no such thing as too small.
No.
All you need to do is reflect back on a time that somebody did something kind for you, something tiny, held a door open or paid for your coffee or gave you a really friendly smile. And the fact that we're probably all thinking of something shows how powerful it is. Like, we remember it.
Yeah, we do. And actually, someone in the audience, and I'd encourage anyone who has a question from this point as we come into the last 15 minutes to please pop a little question in chat for us, and I'll ask Brooke. Someone in the audience has actually spoken to that, kind of extending from that. How contagious is care? Like, do we see it start to kind of play out in a ripple effect when we start with the intention of it?
Absolutely. And you can think, so I kind of organized the book into 9 different core ideas or pillars of care. And they are connection, kindness, awe, nature, making, movement as opposed to exercise, play, and healing and rest. And if you just think for a moment about a tiny little act of one of those types of care, how it might uplift you or connect you or deliver you that moment of wonder or joy, think broadly about how that could impact the following moment of your day. Much like the example I had with with spending that extra moment with your child and connecting and changing the foundation of your relationship. Perhaps you have a moment of wonder when you're getting the mail out of the mailbox and you notice a spider web on the corner of the mailbox and it's covered in pine pollen and it's beautiful. That's all you do. You just notice it. But then you might see your neighbor on the way back into your apartment building. And because you have had that moment of noticing, of nature, of awe, you give them a really big smile. And maybe that's it for you. But maybe for them, maybe they're really lonely. Maybe that moment of connection buoys them. Maybe that's the thing that they needed to get through that day. And you'll never know. And they might go back in and they might cuddle their cat. And their cat and their relationship with their cat and that physical connection could boost their serotonin levels. And maybe as a result, they go and they connect with a friend via Instagram and they organize a video call. And it's just those ripples that, like, I'd love to be able to map them, but we can't.
Wow.
We go out and we care.
That would be a cool website.
It would be cool. It would be really cool.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think it's the ultimate act of faith as well, like faith in humanity, faith in the fact that we can take up space and that we are worthy and that what we do matters. Because I ultimately believe that for good and bad, everything that we do matters. And I think that if we all recognize that our actions, our choices, our decisions don't happen in a vacuum, even if we think they do, they don't. And I think that is probably one of the most contagious ideas, because you start to view your interactions and your choices differently as a result of that.
Absolutely. Now, we've had a question from a wonderful woman who we both know, but for privacy reasons, of course, I won't share her name, but we met her at a Perth event, both you and I did years ago. And I still have that gorgeous crochet face.
I know exactly
cloth. And her favorite chapter in the book is the one on creativity as care. And she wanted you to just speak to that a little bit and maybe the people who haven't read the book yet to get a little taste of the magic in there.
Yeah, I found it a really interesting chapter to write, actually, because I recognized early on that we really only value creativity if it has like a capitalist value, And I say this as someone who accidentally launched a jewelry label because I really enjoyed making jewelry just for fun, just for gifts, just, for a hobby. And then people are like, you really should sell these at markets. And then, at markets, they're like, you really should get into wholesale. And, 3 years down the track, I'm like, I didn't mean to start this, but this is how my creativity, my expression was validated. So that's the way I went. And it was unpacking all of that and realizing that, we do that. We still do that. We say it to our friends who are good at a particular hobby, and we laud people whose art reaches a certain, price threshold, and like that's success. So it was really about, the whole chapter is about unpacking that, and reflecting on how the act of creation, and that's a very loose sort of a very loose definition applied to that. It can be, things that you create with your hands. It can be things you create with your mouth, singing, poetry, talking, storytelling. It can be gardening. It can be dance. It can be anything that feels like an act of creation. Tapping into the therapeutic benefits of that, and to the mindfulness benefits of that, and also just to, the sense of the state of flow that we can often fall into when we are doing something repetitive, like stirring or chopping or strumming a guitar or a ukulele. They have massive benefits for our health, physical and also mental and emotional health. And the flow on, of course, from that is that this is a creativity, the act of making is now becoming a tool that the healthcare system, particularly in the UK, is utilising to boost people's mental health and their emotional well-being. So, it's really an investigation, I guess, into what that can look like, and also encouraging people who will look at the chapter heading and go, well, I'm not creative. Encouraging them that actually, yes, everyone is creative. It doesn't need to look like painting a picture or throwing a set of pottery on a wheel. It can be rearranging the furniture in your bedroom. It can be wearing a different lipstick color. It can be putting on a new outfit combination. Again, shifting our mindset to recognizing so many of our choices and our actions during the day can be viewed as acts of creativity, and we get to enjoy the benefits of those acts of creativity only if we recognize them, and pay attention to them, and as a result then, I guess, make space for more of them. Yeah. And on the crocheted cloth that you mentioned, I was actually thinking of this particular person when I was writing this chapter, because because
she'll be blushing out there.
She gifted us those cloths, and that was one of the most lovely things that anyone has ever done. And part of my personal exploration of creativity was to learn, put myself in a position where I learnt a new creative kind of skill and allowed myself to be really bad at it. So I learnt to crochet, and I fell in love with crocheting by crocheting stacks of dishcloths. And I think that removing any results-oriented kind of outcome-based measures of success and just enjoying creativity for the sake of creativity is the thing that I would love to encourage people to do and to try.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the places we can all start is with our cooking.
Yes.
Obviously we feed ourselves every day. That's not going anywhere.
Yep.
And we're incredibly lucky to be able to do so, right? And so to be able to bring an element of creativity. I wonder what would happen if I did that chicken recipe again the same time, but this time I popped some cumin in there for a bit of a Moroccan vibe, or and that is creative expression. And I think coming back to your earlier points about calling on us to all be more aware, and to really be in awe of little tiny things. How amazing to prepare a beautiful quiche or a lovely chickpea salad and change the dressing up and be in awe of how it changes the whole vibe of the dish. And
exactly.
Really.
And there's so many ways that all of these ideas like interrelate. They don't all happen separately as well. Cooking's a perfect example because it can be connection. It can be kindness, it can be creativity, it can be awe, it can be healing. You can kind of tick multitude of boxes. Exactly, with one act of care. And I think, that's for me the joy of kind of exploring these ideas as well, is like, well, making can also feel like play, and it can also feel like movement, and it can also feel like, connection, and sort of finding ways to boost those acts of care and the benefits as well.
We've had a question which takes us right back to the beginning of the book on why you opened with the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
That's a good question. You know what? It was weird when I wrote it and I went with it. So the connection chapter opens with an explainer of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon game. And I've always loved that game. I think it's ridiculous and hilarious. But it also highlights, you know, the hyper-connected world that we live in. You know, you really can access almost any piece of information on anyone or anything with a handful of clicks of the mouse or swipes of your finger. And that ties into this idea that we are feeling guilty about feeling lonely when we have the entire world, you know, in our pockets or in our desks. And I think that it really is worth reflecting on, that just because we have access to this information and these people and, you know, these 700 Facebook friends, or, you know, all the people you went to high school with on Instagram, whatever it might look like, that is not the same as a relationship. That is not the same as genuine connection. It can be, but I just think it's really important to recognize that, you know, yes, we live in a hyper-connected world, which is awesome, but that's not enough. We need to prioritize true connection, which was the trap that I fell into for the longest time. Like, I've got lots of friends, see, you know, I'll just ping them on Instagram or I'll send them a text. It's not the same as sitting down on the phone and having a heart-to-heart. It's not the same as writing them a letter. It's not the same as cooking them a soup and dropping it off at their front door. I think it just highlights the fact that we need to be intentional when we connect with each other.
Absolutely. And we've got a great question here that I think is a great one for us to wrap up today's conversation on, is when someone's feeling really burnt out and having that rock bottom day, it's impossible to get away with the last couple of years without that. So I really want to just acknowledge that is completely normal.
Yes.
And I've had a few of those myself, as I know you have, Brooke.
Yes, indeed.
What would you say to them? Where does one start in starting to bring these concepts and principles of care in when you're on a bottom day?
Yeah, I think starting where you started is really important. Recognizing that it's normal, recognizing that you're certainly not alone in feeling like that. And that applied before the last 18 months kicked all of our butts, but particularly now. Sometimes life asks too much of us, regardless of how strong your boundaries are, regardless of how intentional you are with your time and your energy. There will be times that it's just really tough. And that's okay. So, you know, I don't want people to ever use that feeling of burnout as a stick with which to, you know, beat themselves, because it's not helpful, first of all. But it's also expecting the unrealistic of ourselves. Yeah. And when things feel too hard, too big, too overwhelming, my advice is to always go really small and think about what is the smallest act that I can do right now that will lead me to feel cared for, even in like some minuscule way, whether that is taking 3 really deep breaths before you get out of bed in the morning, you know, those deep diaphragmatic breaths that you really pull in and push out, and use that as a moment of care, whether it is spending 5 seconds looking out the window, whether it is doodling on the edge of your notepad before your next Zoom call, and reflecting that those moments in between the doing, you know, the consuming and the producing, they are acts of care. They are moments of rest. They are moments of healing, and that they are not something you need to work for. You know, I think we view rest and quiet and downtime as a reward, and it's not a reward. It's not something we need to work for. It's something we all need. So I think that, you know, recognizing and acknowledging that you are not a machine and that it is okay to need these moments is the best place to begin, because it's kindness, you know, it's compassion, it's And it's important and it's powerful.
And I love that, because what you've essentially said there is we're probably caring and we're probably having those moments. It's just that we haven't been in awe of them or recognized them or tuned into them enough to realize that we're actually giving ourselves some little mini hugs,
Exactly.
proverbial hugs throughout the day,
Yeah.
and to then expand from there. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So this is the book, guys. I highly encourage everyone on the call who doesn't have it yet to grab it. I dare say it's possibly one of the best things you could give someone as well at the moment. Brooke, thank you so much for writing it and for sharing your thoughts about the author journey, the personal journey of care, and also then, of course, being so generous as to share it with others. What a great conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex, for making time. I know we're all zoomed out, so I really appreciate you coming on and talking. This was wonderful. It was exactly what I needed. So thank you.
I care and you care. So
I know. We care deep. We care deep, and that's the thing, right? But also thank you to the State Library. Thank you to Rachel and Emily and to everyone who has jumped on the call today. It's been really wonderful.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys.